Harry sat at a small table in a cozy cafe just a few streets from the zoo. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the warm aroma of pastries, but Harry barely noticed it as he stared out the window, lost in thought. The events at the Westfield Mall still lingered in his mind, a puzzle he couldn't quite piece together. The door chimed softly as Charlie Weasley entered, his familiar red hair catching the light as he scanned the room. Spotting Harry, he made his way over, sliding into the seat opposite him with a casual grin. "Morning, Harry," Charlie greeted, his voice carrying the easy warmth that always seemed to follow him. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, sleek mobile phone, placing it on the table between them. "Thought you might need one of these, just in case." Harry glanced at the phone. A simple model without any frills that modern smartphones had, but more than adequate for essential communication. He nodded, picking it up and tucking it into his jacket pocket. "Thanks, Charlie. It'll make things easier if anything else happens." Charlie leaned back in his chair, his expression growing more serious as he studied Harry. "Speaking of which, you look like you've been through the ringer. What happened?" Harry sighed, running a hand through his hair as he collected his thoughts. "Something went down at the Westfield Mall yesterday. A young wizard, just a kid, was apparating in front of Muggles. It caused quite a scene." Charlie's eyes widened slightly, though he didn't look entirely surprised. "Apparating? In the middle of a Muggle mall? That's a bold move." "Bold and stupid," Harry corrected, his frustration evident in his tone. "He recognized me, too, called me out by name. I had to talk fast to make it look like he was just some crazy kid. But it was close, Charlie. Too close." "That's the second incident in less than a week. First the zoo, now this. Whoever's behind this is getting bolder, less concerned with keeping our world hidden," Charlie observed, his tone carrying a sense of urgency. "That's what worries me," Harry admitted, his gaze dropping to the table. "It's almost like they want to be caught, like they're testing the waters to see how far they can go before someone notices." Charlie nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's reckless, that's for sure. But why? What's the end game here? They're putting themselves, and all of us, at risk." "I've been asking myself the same thing," Harry said, leaning forward slightly. "There has to be a reason, something we're not seeing yet, but we're just playing catch-up until we figure out who's behind this." Charlie let out a slow breath, his brow furrowed in concentration. "And you're sure this kid at the mall wasn't acting alone? No sign he was part of something bigger?" Harry shook his head. He seemed clueless, just excited to meet Harry Potter. "But that's the thing, Charlie. He knew exactly who I was, even though I've been keeping a low profile for years. Someone's been talking, spreading stories, maybe even encouraging this behavior. If that's true, we could be dealing with a network, not just a lone troublemaker. And that's a lot more dangerous," Charlie concluded, his words underscoring the gravity of the situation. Harry nodded, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "Exactly. That's why we need to be careful, watchful. If this continues, it's only a matter of time before someone slips up, and the consequences could be disastrous." "Whatever's going on, we'll figure it out. I'll keep my ears to the ground at the zoo and see if I can pick up on anything unusual. And if you need anything, you've got my number now," Charlie reassured, his determination palpable. Harry felt a small surge of relief at Charlie's words. Knowing he wasn't facing this alone made the burden a little easier. "Thanks, Charlie, I appreciate it." Charlie smiled, the tension easing slightly from his features. "No need to thank me, mate. We've got each other's backs, right? Just like old times." Harry returned the smile, though it was tinged with the gravity of their situation. "Yeah, just like old times." The two of them sat in companionable silence for a moment, sipping their coffee and watching the world go by outside the window. But beneath the surface, Harry's mind was still racing, trying to connect the dots and figure out what, or who, was behind the growing threat that loomed over them all. At the police station, the rhythmic clatter of keyboards filled the air as officers typed up reports, filed paperwork, and discussed ongoing cases. Harry sat at his desk, his fingers moving across the keyboard as he worked on the report from the Westfield Mall incident. He focused on the details, careful to downplay the more unusual aspects of the event, like the fact that the young man had been apparating in front of a crowd of muggles. Across from him, Thompson, his fellow officer, was typing up his own notes. Thompson was a tall, lanky man with a mop of dark hair and a curious nature that sometimes bordered on nosy. He liked to dig into every detail to uncover the story behind the story. "So, Harry," Thompson began, not looking up from his screen, "I've got to ask, how did you manage to talk that kid down yesterday? From what I heard, he was causing quite a scene before you arrived." Harry's fingers paused on the keyboard, and he fought the urge to sigh. He had known this question was coming. Thompson was too inquisitive to let something like this go without probing, but that didn't make it any easier to answer. "Just did what needed to be done," Harry replied, his voice deliberately casual. "He was scared, acting out. Once I got through to him, he calmed down." Thompson glanced up, his brow furrowed in mild confusion. "Sure, but it's like you knew exactly what to say, how to handle him. You've got to admit, that's pretty impressive. Most of us wouldn't have had a clue where to start." Harry shrugged, keeping his focus on the report in front of him. You pick up a few things on the job. When you get down to it, people aren't all that different. Most just want to be heard. Thompson leaned back in his chair, clearly unsatisfied with such a simple explanation. "Come on, Potter. There's got to be more to it than that. You've got this knack, you know? You can see through people and know their thoughts before they say it. How do you do it?" Harry knew he couldn't tell Thompson the real reason. How could he explain that years of living in the wizarding world had honed his instincts, that he could sense the subtle undercurrents of magic and read people in ways most muggles never could? But that wasn't something he could share. Not here. Not with Thompson. So instead, he leaned back in his chair and met Thompson's gaze with a calm, measured look. "Call it intuition," Harry said simply. "Sometimes you just have a feeling about things. You've been on the force long enough. You know what I mean." Thompson frowned slightly, considering Harry's words. "Intuition, huh? I guess that makes sense. Still, you've got some of the best instincts I've seen. Maybe I should be taking notes from you." Harry offered a small, non-committal smile. "We all have our strengths. You're great at digging up details others might miss. Me, I just follow my gut." Thompson nodded, though he still seemed a bit perplexed. "Well, whatever it is, it worked yesterday. You saved that kid from a world of trouble. Let's just hope he learned his lesson." Harry returned to the report, grateful that Thompson was finally letting the matter drop. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Let's hope so." After that, they both fell into silence. The only sound between them was the steady clacking of keys. Harry focused on finishing his report, but his mind wandered to the bigger issue. How many more incidents like this would there be? How often would he rely on his intuition to keep the peace between the magical and non-magical worlds? As he typed the final sentence of his report, Harry couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whoever, or whatever, was behind these incidents hasn't been done yet. And neither was he. Harry stepped through the hidden entrance behind the Leaky Cauldron, the bricks shifting and rearranging themselves to reveal the bustling narrow street of Diagon Alley. The familiar sights and sounds greeted him, the chatter of witches and wizards, the clink of cauldrons, and the flickering lights of shop windows. But today, there was an undercurrent of tension in the air, a palpable unease that Harry hadn't felt in years. As he made his way through the crowded street, his eyes caught sight of Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, the joke shop still as bright and gaudy as ever. He pushed open the door, and a bell tinkled overhead, announcing his arrival. The shop was filled with customers, but there was a noticeable lack of laughter and excitement. Even the joke items seemed less lively, their colours a little more muted. Behind the counter stood George Weasley, his usual grin replaced by a tight-lipped expression. He looked up as Harry entered, his face lighting up slightly. "Harry, long time no see, mate." "Hey, George," Harry greeted, offering a small smile. "How's business?" George shrugged, glancing around the shop. "Could be better. Everyone's a bit on edge these days. Not exactly the best atmosphere for selling jokes." Before Harry could respond, a familiar voice called out his name. He turned to see Ron and Hermione walking toward him, their faces etched with concern. "Harry!" Hermione exclaimed, pulling him into a quick hug. "We were hoping we'd find you here." Ron nodded in greeting, though his usual easygoing demeanour was overshadowed by a furrowed brow. "We need to talk, mate. Things are getting out of hand." Harry nodded, motioning for them to follow him to a quieter corner of the shop, away from customers' prying eyes and ears. Once they were settled, he looked at his friends, seeing the worry in their faces. "What's going on?" Harry asked, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew. Hermione sighed, running a hand through her bushy hair. "The entire wizarding community is in a state of panic, Harry. These incidents, magic being exposed in the Muggle world, are causing an uproar. People are terrified that the statute of secrecy will be breached." Ron nodded, crossing his arms as he leaned against a shelf. "It's all anyone's talking about. They're scared, Harry. Terrified. If this keeps up, it's only a matter of time before Muggles start figuring out the truth, and if that happens..." "It could be disastrous," Hermione finished, her voice laced with anxiety. "The Ministry is working overtime to keep things under control, but there's only so much they can do. If more incidents happen, they might be unable to cover it up." George, who had been listening quietly, chimed in. "It's bad, Harry. There's talk of tightening restrictions, of cracking down on anyone who even looks like they might be involved. People are paranoid, afraid to step out of line if accused of something." Harry felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had seen the fear in the Muggle world firsthand, but hearing it spread through the wizarding community made it all the more real. "And what about the Ministry?" he asked. "Do they have any idea who's behind this?" Ron shook his head. "Not a clue. They've been investigating, but whoever's doing this is covering their tracks well. No leads, no suspects, nothing. It's like they're ghosts." "Or like they want to stay hidden until it's too late," Hermione added, her expression grim. "The worst part is, we don't know what they want. Is it just chaos they're after, or do they have a bigger plan?" Harry let out a slow breath, trying to process the weight of what his friends were telling him. The implications were staggering. A few more incidents like the ones at the zoo and the mall, and the fragile balance between the magical and non-magical worlds could be shattered. "This is bigger than we thought," Harry said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "Whoever's behind this, they're playing a dangerous game, and we're all caught in the middle of it." Hermione reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "We've been through worse before. We must stay vigilant and keep our eyes and ears open." Ron nodded in agreement. "And we've got your back, mate. Whatever's going on, we'll get to the bottom of it, together." George smiled, the first sign of his usual optimism breaking through. "Yeah, and if you need a good laugh, you know where to find me." Harry couldn't help but smile at that, despite the heaviness in his heart. "Thanks, all of you. I knew I could count on you." As they stood together in the corner of the shop, Harry felt a renewed sense of determination. The situation was dire, But he wasn't alone. With Ron, Hermione, and George by his side, he knew they had a fighting chance to uncover the truth and protect both worlds from the impending storm. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out, and that whatever was coming next would be far more dangerous than any of them could imagine.